Just a decade ago, hardly anyone had heard of Bitcoin outside of some technology circles. Today, it's gained widespread buzz and acceptance from some big businesses and major investors. Though Bitcoin has a logo, it's actually a purely online digital currency using computer code, acting as real money for people to make their purchases. It was born after the crash of 2008. Although there had been digital currencies before, none of them ever really gained traction. But over the years, Bitcoin gradually caught on. In 2010, it was worth less than a penny, but in early April, it peaked at nearly $65,000 before falling back. The explosion in Bitcoin's price since last fall has come as major financial institutions are offering it to clients. And electric vehicle builder Tesla made a splash in February, buying $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. Not only that,
they intend to start accepting Bitcoin for payment when they sell Tesla cars in the future.
Richard Lyons of the Berkeley School of Business also said that's the wave of the future.
The trend is inexorable. I think that not just with Bitcoin, but other cryptocurrencies, that those will become transactable currencies increasingly over the next 5 years. It's not going to happen overnight.
But even as cryptocurrencies gain acceptance, governments like China, the European Union, the U.S., and more are moving toward digital currencies as well, possibly leading to competition for Bitcoin. Regardless of the future of Bitcoin itself, it's clear that it's opened the door for a revolution in digital finance, a revolution that is likely to change the world. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
I'm sure a lot of people wish they got in early. For more on the story, let's go back to Pat.
Well, if you're as baffled as I am about Bitcoin, and I understand if you lose your code, you might be wiped out. You wouldn't have any money left, and it's not there in the bank. You've got to have your code in order to get it. But CBN News financial editor Drew Parkhill, Drew, what in the world, what is going on with Bitcoin, and why does it have the potential to change our financial world?
Pat, it really does have the potential to change our financial world. It's not going to happen overnight, as the professor from UC Berkeley said. You know, it's going to take time, but more and more people are using Bitcoin as basically an alternative money. And it's also, and we don't have time to go into all this, but it has also opened up all kinds of new types of buying and selling and digital artwork and so forth that goes for a lot of money. It's just amazing. This has opened up a whole new world. It's gradually filtering down to quote unquote Main Street, so to speak. Most people are interested in it because it's had such a huge run up in price, as Dale showed in his story. The reason it's had such a huge run up is people recognize this is an idea whose time has come. And it's got long-term implications. I'll just point out, Pat, back in 1995, you and I demonstrated the internet here on the 700 Club for one of the very first demonstrations ever. At the time, you asked me, how's this going to affect television? I said, it will replace television. Now, at the time, I didn't know that something called cutting the cord was coming, but it did. But this week at the Oscars, Netflix, which didn't exist and couldn't have existed before the internet, won 7 Oscars. I think Facebook won an Oscar too. Well, they did win an Oscar for something or other. And so we couldn't have foreseen that. We can't foresee what Bitcoin's going to lead to, but we know this will change everything. No question about it.
All right, well, look, they supposedly mine it, and it's all done with computers. Tell me how the stuff works.
Well, miners get paid in a certain amount of Bitcoin as they bring more Bitcoins into existence. The majority of them have already been brought in. But the important thing is that this is a purely online currency. And the idea is for privacy, you know, so that people won't know what's going on, that they can do just you-to-me transactions, peer-to-peer, and so forth. The important thing, and this is very important, is that governments are looking to get into the act, as Dale pointed out in his story. Now, I want to show you a soundbite. Now, this is not from just some analyst. This is not from some Wall Street type. This is from Mark Carney, who was at the time the governor of the Bank of England. The Bank of England was built, or not built, but brought into being in 1694. It's basically the model for central banks around the world, like the Federal Reserve. It's their version of the Federal Reserve. He said this in 2019, talking about an alternative to the dollar. This was at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in August of 2019. He said this in an interview on CNBC. Let's take a look.
You don't just jump to something new overnight. And what we want in a multipolar world, I think we'd agree that we've got European engine, we've got the Chinese engine, we've got the US engine of this economy. Multipolar world, you need a multipolar currency. The question is, how do you get there? And I laid out some ideas of how you would get there.
So this is the governor of the Bank of England, Pat, laying out ideas for an alternative to the dollar. We've often talked about what's going to happen to the dollar with problems with it. This is a possibility. Again, not overnight, but this has been discussed for a while now. So this has serious implications for the U.S. dollar as well as the rest of the world.
You know, we are the reserve currency of the world, and everybody plays off the dollar.
Right.
So the dollar is the means of exchange. Right. The Chinese are trying to introduce the renminbi, and it's not really taking hold because there are not enough people that want it. Now, these things, tell me how you get a Bitcoin. You mine it, computers?
Well,
how do you get one of them?
It's getting easier and easier and easier to do that. It used to be really pretty difficult. You had, like you were talking about earlier, you had to get a wallet, and you had to make sure you had the code. And there's one fellow who had enormous amounts of money in it because he made so much, but he lost the code and he couldn't figure it out. And so, but it's getting easier and easier to do that. The major financial institutions, J.P. Morgan Chase is now moving to open up a Bitcoin managed account for wealthier clients and so forth. You're going to be able to do it through Venmo, but you don't even, like you can use a MasterCard and pay it through with Bitcoin and so forth. So there are very important things about this, but the most important long-term implication, there are a couple of them. Number one, if you do have national currencies that are digital, like a digital dollar, the government could eventually be able to track everything. That raises huge privacy implications. The other thing, and this is extremely important, is if and when, and let's face it, it's going to be when you have a global electronic digital system that's all electronic, that means all buying and selling is done that way, you can be shut out of that system at some point. In other words, you would not be able to buy or sell without permission. I think we've read that somewhere, Pat.
Something like that in the book of Revelation last time. You really think that could usher in actually a takeover of the world currency if everybody's in Bitcoin, and it can be withdrawn by the governments, and that means all the money you've got can be taken unless you had the mark of the beast. Is that what you're saying?
It probably won't be Bitcoin. What Bitcoin did was open the door for global digital currencies, plural, that it will be interchangeable. There may be one eventually. Again, we've just started down the road. We don't know how it's going to get there. We don't know how long it's going to take. It'll probably take decades. It's not next week, but we've opened the door now for the first time.
Thanks, Drew. Amazing stuff.